Wonderful to see all of you, or virtually anyway. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Michael Burrows, and I serve as director of the Kegley Institute of Ethics. And on behalf of the Institute, thank you for joining us for this event and important conversation that we're titling NextTech, from the Central Valley to the Silicon Valley. We have an excellent panel for you tonight, focusing on the challenges, successes, and formative life experiences of young professionals who each have deep ties to the Central Valley and who are also now thriving in professional careers in tech and entrepreneurship. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our event sponsors for this event, including the CSUB Center for Career Education and Community Engagement, the Kegley family, Kaiser Permanente and Adventist Health Bakersfield, Valley Strong Credit Union, and the Kern County Library. And I'd also like to give a very special thanks to Sergio Brito Solorzano, a Kegley Institute of Ethics student fellow who has been instrumental in envisioning and planning this event tonight. So for any CSUB students out there, and I hope there are several of you, many of you I should say, if you're interested in learning more about the Kegley Institute of Ethics Student Fellowship Program, please check out the link that I just put in the chat. We are accepting applications for this fellowship program that are due May 3rd. And we'd love to work with you to develop more programs next academic year, just like Sergio has done with this one. So a few notes on procedure for this evening's event. First of all, closed captioning and a live event transcript is available to you via the closed captioning button on your webinar screen. So you can click on that if you'd like to view a transcript or closed captioning. Following our moderated conversation with our panelists tonight, we will have an audience question and answer session. If you have questions for any of the panelists, feel free to enter them via the Q&A function in Zoom. And note that you can submit questions at any time so that they're in the queue. No need to wait till the end of the session to do that. And I'll do my best to get to as many of your questions as possible for our panelists. And you can also feel free to address a question to a specific panelist or leave it open-ended as you see fit. And with that, I'll turn things over to Sergio to begin our event tonight and to introduce our panelists. So Sergio, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you so much for that warm welcome, Dr. Burrows. A little bit of our event today. We were inspired to organize this panel because research shows that often people of color are disproportionately and underrepresented in these large corporations. Research shows that seeing yourself represented at large companies has a significant impact on whether people of color pursue these jobs and related professional opportunities. Therefore, we wanted to bring our panelists together today to inspire our entire audience and community, but also so that students of color see themselves represented and feel encouraged to pursue goals and dreams, just like our distinguished panel here today. Today, we'll be hearing from our panelists on their journey from growing up, either personally or professionally in the Central Valley, to successfully developing a career at some of the biggest tech companies in the Silicon Valley. First off, I'd like to introduce Stephen Ruiz. Stephen Ruiz was raised in the Central Valley and graduated from the University of California, Merced. Hello, Stephen. He now supports the Devices and Services Legal Business Unit at Google. As an administrative business partner, Stephen manages the team's events, programs, onboarding, budget, and internal communications with the sole responsibility for team culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Stephen has been employed with Google for about 2 years now, and his fun fact is that he recently got a promotion, so he will be celebrating in Hawaii. Congratulations, Stephen. And then up next, we have Dana Stubblefield. She is a recruiting M&A program manager at Facebook who started her career in tech right after graduating from UC Merced in 2017. On her free time, she enjoys making candles, reading, and binge watching shows on Netflix. Right on, Dana. Welcome aboard. And then up next, we have Roberto Lopez. He goes by Tito. Hello, Tito. Tito was born and raised in the Central Valley. He also graduated from UC Merced and works as a recruiter at Twitter, diversity recruiter, focusing on events and conferences. He has been working at Twitter for 2 years now, and his fun fact is that he is a diehard Barcelona fan. All right, Tito. All right, up next we have Ish Verdusco. His personal mission is to help people from underrepresented groups achieve their goals. He has worked at Snapchat, LinkedIn, and now leads growth and marketing at a social media food startup called Crave It. His fun fact is that he authored a best-selling book and launched his own media company. Nice, Ish, right on. Welcome aboard. All right, so we are going to be asking our panelists a few questions, like Dr. Burrows mentioned earlier. If you have any of your personal questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat box, and we'll review them after we ask these preliminary questions. First off, we'd like to talk about their journey. So what was their journey like into landing a job at one of these big tech companies? So I'd like to start off with Stephen. Stephen, tell us about your roots in the Central Valley, and also how did your experience in the Central Valley, either personal or professional, motivate you or serve as an asset for your professional success?
100%, and thank you so much for having me, Sergio. First, I'd like to say hello, CSUB members and members of the community. First, I'm honored to be here to share my career path to tech, as well as learn from my peers and fellow presenters here. So good to connect with you once again. To begin, I am what I'm calling a full product of the Central Valley. I was born and raised in Danuba, California. For those who don't know, that's pretty much Fresno. And I studied at UC Merced alongside these amazing panelists. At university, I was involved in student government, the campus activities board, again, alongside my fellow panelists, the women's programs, Greek life, the Office of Student Life, and with my extra time I thought I had, also participated in co-ed cheer and competitive dance. So now to the question. I think my motivation stemmed from, seizing open opportunities or actually creating those for myself. I think the beautiful thing about the Central Valley still developing is that you can develop with it, or better yet, shape it. And since UC Merced was only a few years old, I had the opportunity to build programs, to influence events, to drive leadership and even engage with senior leadership, which I think I otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity at maybe, let's say, a large metropolitan university. More importantly, I think the quality of these experiences and the networks that I gained along the way is what really propelled me forward. And as a colored queer man, I knew these experiences wouldn't be handed over to me. So I really had to take advantage of what was offered and maximize it. Thank you.
Definitely, Stephen. Thank you so much for that. Right on. Up next, Dana, a little bit about your roots.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Dana. Nice to see you all. For me, I received my bachelor's from UC Merced, as Sergio mentioned earlier. And similar to Stephen, I feel like it's a very small school. And so a lot of people could see it as having limitations, but I feel like we had a lot of opportunities because of our newness and our size. I took on club leadership positions that taught me everything isn't always going to be built out perfectly, or for it to be worth my while. I feel like the grit required to take on these leadership positions, they don't have a lot of funding or maybe not a lot of structure, but it leaves a lasting impact on you during those formative periods of your life. And I feel like it taught me to be really resourceful and optimistic to make the most out of my situations. I also, while at UC Merced, took advantage of the study abroad program. Again, because we went to a really small school, it was not very competitive. And so I really easily was able to study abroad in Rome, which I feel like helped boost my resume because I also got an internship out there. So really grateful for that experience.
Wow, Rome, that's amazing. All right, up next, Tito.
Thank you, Sergio. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Burrows and Sergio here for having me participate in this panel today, and glad to see some of my old friends and colleagues here from UC Merced days. But as Sergio mentioned, I'm Tito. My name is Roberto, but I go by Tito. I have a very similar background to Stephen here, where I was born and raised in the Central Valley. I expect nobody to know where it is. It's called Dos Palos, California. It's really like a town of like 3,000 people. So I've had the full experience of coming from the Central Valley, but similar to Stephen and Dana here, I graduated with my bachelor's at UC Merced. And I think a couple of things that made an impact for me at UC Merced that made me, the person I am today is definitely taking advantage of the opportunities that a smaller campus like UC Merced provided. As they all mentioned here, we went to a small, tight-knit community where everybody really knew each other. Maybe even, you didn't know them by name, but you've seen them around, you've seen the people around. So everybody was always willing to help each other, willing to take things to the next level. And I think that's what really helped me, participating in things like a professional organization, joining the student body, networking with as many colleagues as possible or many friends from UC Merced, and taking the opportunities that came my way, even if there was times where I didn't want to do things, or I didn't want to work early, or I didn't want to do an internship. I just took those opportunities, and those opportunities definitely took me to that next level where I am today. Thanks, Sergio.
Definitely. Thank you. And then up next, Ish, on your roots.
Yeah, what's going on, everybody? Great to see we got 63 participants on the call, so that's awesome. So I'm actually from Los Angeles, but I went to UC Merced just like everybody else on this call. And I guess I'll answer the question a little differently. Personally, you said personal, professional, like how did it motivate me throughout my journey, right? And so like we all mentioned, going to UC Merced is a really small school. Back when I graduated in 2014, I think we had, I don't know, maybe like 5 graduating classes before me. So there wasn't very many alumni out in the workforce. And so when I entered the workforce in 2014, it was like pretty discouraging because like employers didn't even know where the school was. Like I was talking to people and they would like throw shade, and they would kind of like, UC what? Is that like UC Berkeley's like younger brother, younger sister, So I got a lot of crap graduating. And it was pretty disheartening. And the way I took it is like all motivation. Like, okay, you're going to talk crap about my little school. I'm going to like shove it in your face. And I'm going to do everything that I can to basically like prove all of you wrong. And like that mentality doesn't always work, but I think in this particular situation, it did, only because like your back is against the wall. I had no alumni out there to like reach out to. Very, very little alumni were working in tech. I think I used the LinkedIn alumni tool, and we had like 3 alumni out of the whole 5 graduating classes that were working in tech at the time. So like they were still trying to make a name for themselves. Obviously they couldn't help me. And I just took it all and just like used it as motivation, as drive, and said, you know what, I'm going to figure it out and try to like pave a path for others from UC Merced and other smaller schools to like have a shot, or at least have like the respect to like have an interview or have a conversation and not be treated like second class citizens, because that's how it kind of felt sometimes. But yeah.
Thank you, Ish. And something that you all mentioned was your roots at UC Merced. And I think that brings up a really good point about how small the community is and how tight-knit it is. I feel like that's very comparable to CSU Bakersfield, because it is a really close, tight-knit community. It's a really small school. So we can definitely relate on, going to a university as such. But we're super grateful that we got all of you all to give us advice today on how to land a job in tech. So with that, Tito, how did you land your job in tech? And is there any advice for people interested in doing the same?
Yeah, I think I had not a very particular route where I went straight from graduating to working at Twitter. So I actually had a few opportunities before coming to Twitter. So when I was in UC Merced, I was interning for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which is completely different than what I'm doing now. But when I was there, when I was interning, I had the opportunity to do a project at the end of the year that focused on recruiting, that focused on kind of like the HR part of stuff. So I think that's where like my interest for the recruiting field really started. And seeing people like actually like Ish or a couple other people who were all in these tech companies, and the recruiting HR kind of aspect of tech was very interesting to me. So that's where I kind of started. And I went to a startup. So that's where my actual recruiting experience started. I was at a very small startup. There was maybe 6 of us working as cybersecurity recruiters. And I was horrible at it. Like I'm gonna be honest, I was super horrible. I had no clue what I was doing. I did try my best. I worked hard, but it was just not for me. one thing about the role that I did love was going to universities and going to career fairs and going to talk to these different students. That's where it brought me a lot of happiness, brought me a lot of passion. So I decided to pursue that and find different opportunities where I could work directly with students and work with people who have my similar background. And luckily, just with networking, conversating with friends, I found this opportunity going back to my alma mater at UC Merced to work as at the Career Center. So I was working with business students, providing them advice, helping them with their resumes, etc. And honestly, what I did in order to get into tech with that role is I took advantage of everything that came my way. So one part of my role was to bring different tech companies to UC Merced. One of the companies that came was Twitter. And actually, that's where I met a lot of my coworkers. They came, they had an event, they hosted like a whole day of events, and I went the extra mile for them. I did give them the presidential level experience at Twitter. And luckily, they were super impressed with the effort I put into their events, with the follow-ups, with the students I was providing. And that really got the footstep into Twitter, into getting the opportunity. They actually reached out to me and they were like, hey, we have this coordinator contract role that we would love to get you into at Twitter. I interviewed, I didn't get it the first time, but then they opened a second role and I did get it the second time. So I didn't get discouraged, I kept going. I was in a contract for about a year and 5 months at Twitter. On this coordinator role, I didn't see any potential growth, but I kept my head down, worked hard, did what I had to do, always wore different hats at Twitter. And then, eventually that opportunity came. I started as a university recruiter full-time like 5-6 months ago. But then I transitioned into this new role as a diversity recruiter, focusing on both students, new grads, and industry candidates and experienced candidates. So yeah, that was my path, a little bit different than most, but definitely that experience of joining a startup is what I think brought me to my passion and to where I am now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tito. Sounds like there was a lot of like trial and error, and it's okay, to go through those errors. It gets you to where you're destined to be, essentially. Dana, we would love to hear about your experience landing your job in tech, and then any advice for the audience.
Yeah, of course. So during college, like Tito, I had a number of different jobs too, and I wasn't really gung-ho about any of them. It was just kind of a way to make ends meet. So it was like IT jobs, but I did love my event coordinating jobs that I was a part of. And then of course my internship abroad, which was unpaid. And so that helped me kind of like learn how people work in different countries. And I was a social media marketing manager. And so it was a fun experience, but I think from those experiences, I learned that I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do, but I knew I loved working with people. I'm very much a social person. And I knew that I'd want to help people get a job. And so after college, I sent well over 100 applications. I sent a lot. And I was really unlucky. I think I probably got less than 10 interviews from the places that I was applying to. But I, like Tito mentioned earlier, I just was really persistent and I didn't get defeated when I got rejected. In fact, I was interested in hearing why I got rejected. I was like, how can I make my resume better? How can I, stand out? And then eventually I started tapping into my network of friends who graduated and started expressing interest in places where they worked. And then ultimately I received a referral from someone who was in my co-ed business fraternity that I knew at UC Merced to work at Facebook for a contractor position. And I was a contractor for a year and then switched into full-time position for another 2 years, and then leveraged my network again to land the job that I'm in now. I just started talking to people, figuring out which roles may be open at the company internally. And then that's how I'm now an M&A program manager after starting as a contractor recruiting coordinator. So that's been my journey. But I think one of the themes is definitely to just leverage your network.
Definitely. Networking is key. Sometimes I hear a lot of professionals say it's who you know and then it's also who knows you. So yeah, definitely networking is key. Up next, I kind of wanted to hear a little bit more from Stephen on once you embarked on your professional career, were there any challenges with getting acclimated with company culture at Google? Any challenges that you might have faced?
Wow, I mean, I would love to say it was all rainbows and butterflies, but we know life can be a little bit more mischievous than that. And yes, 100%. I mean, there's a steep learning curve wherever you come in tech, right? You're learning a whole new vernacular. You're also not competing, but you're also partnering with some of the most brilliant minds, right? People who did graduate from prestigious universities, who have a vocabulary way beyond words I would have ever known. So that's almost a barrier as well. It's just trying to keep up with those who might have gotten a different education, I'm going to say. And you know, it's also the high pace at Google. Everyone is an overachiever. Everyone is exceptional. So trying to be as exceptional as everyone else can sometimes feel a little, you know, can sometimes imposter syndrome. We know that's a topic. We know it's extremely valid. And I can tell you, I felt that when I was interviewing for big tech, and I still feel that in big tech, probably even more so, because again, I'm working alongside these intelligent people. So I would say, you know, taking Dana's lesson, just not to feel defeated, instead to think about how you can improve. You know, whenever I am in a meeting, I have dictionary.com open right alongside my meeting, researching every single word so I can learn it and use it myself, right? Being right there alongside my colleagues. So definitely don't feel defeated, just see how you can make yourself better.
Thank you, Stephen. And then Ish, would you like to share a little bit about embarking your professional career? I know you've had experience at Snapchat, LinkedIn, and now Crave It. Have you faced any challenges or any barriers that you had to overcome in order to get acclimated to company culture?
Oh yeah, 100%. Much like Steven, so when I first got into LinkedIn, I think I was just turned 23 years old or something like that. And so it was like super young. Like I told you guys, I already went to UC Merced and I already felt like I was like the oddball out. I felt like I was already an imposter, like getting into tech because nobody knew where I went to school or like who I was. And I'm not sure about the people that are like tuned in, but in tech, there's a real issue in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So like all of us on the call right here, this would be rare to see this many people of color like in a room or on a call for work. So like being a person of color at such a young age, going to a school that like not many people like recognize, it's like the cards are like almost stacked against you. So like as Stephen was speaking, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you felt, because that's how I felt for a really long time. And I still feel that in like patches and waves. But I remember distinctly like my very first week at LinkedIn, back in like 2014, very young, 23 years old. And I walked around on the hallway, like to my desk, and I just like looked around and stopped and was like, yo, is anybody noticing this? Like, where are all the people of color at yet? Like, is this a joke or something? You know, it blew my mind. I had never like culture shock completely, you know? And so for that first entire week, I kind of like kept it low key. I didn't speak too much. I kind of like kept to myself basically, because I felt so like out of place for the first time in a really long time, especially going to UC Merced where it's like a big family, very diverse school. We all know each other, you know, very involved, etc. But I think it was the second week of my job at LinkedIn, and I was a contractor. So sometimes when you're a contractor at like around everybody who's full time, you kind of feel like your job is on the line. You can't mess up. You got to do things right. So it was just a very scary time. But I remember my second week on the job, I was inside one of the break rooms, and keep in mind I hadn't heard Spanish the entire time, aside from like the people who worked there in the kitchen. And somebody came up behind me and told me something in Spanish, like, "Can you pass me that apple?" or something in Spanish, something like, you know, shooting the shit basically. And I kind of turned around and I was like, who is talking to me in Spanish? And it's this guy, Hector Preciado, and he was like a marketing manager there on the floor in that office in San Francisco. And I was just kind of shocked, like, whoa, you speak Spanish, you must be Latino. We started talking, and he ends up becoming my mentor, like my very first mentor, who made me feel comfortable in my own skin at the company. Like that same person was a person who pushed me to join Hola, which is an employee resource group for people of color, mainly Latinos. And that gave me the courage to do like many more things. That helped me get like 3 promotions at the company, apply for jobs that were way out of my scope, and like spread my wings, if like per se, I guess. Like sounds cheesy, but it's so real. Like if it wasn't for that interaction, I don't know how much longer I would have gone, you know, just being like in the shadows. So I guess the tip that I would give to people who maybe are underrepresented is like find that one person who you can just like relax and be yourself with, because it's pretty exhausting. Even now that we're virtual, like it still is exhausting being on so many calls and you feel like you have to like have this facade up. But if you can have just like one daily call, 15 minutes a day, or like for me, it was lunchtime. So like we used to all get together during lunch and like just be like, all right, for this 1 hour, we can just chill and kick it. We don't have to like put up this facade. And like that helped me acclimate to the company culture so much better than like it was before, basically. So it helps just having your people in your corner for sure.
You know, and Sergio, before we move on to the next question, I actually want to provide one more tip as well, and that is affirmations, which is critical. So I would build affirmations into my nightly routine when I was applying at big tech companies. And I'd say things like reminding myself, you know, you're humble, you're ingenious, you're creative, all the things I wanted to be and all the things that I was. So that way I would manifest it and believe it. And again, just remind myself of who I wanted to be. And you know what's so interesting? My manager shared this with me. She does the same thing to this day. Because again, you know, imposter syndrome is alive and well, and it'll definitely keep you. But, you know, when you remind yourself of who you are and who you want to be, it'll be a game changer.
Definitely. Thank you, Stephen and Ish. And then Dana, you mentioned earlier about applying to like 100 jobs and then getting 10 interviews. Once you were able to land that job at Facebook, what was it like for you? I'm kind of interested in the same question. So were there any like barriers or challenges that you had to overcome at Facebook? How was the company culture? Anything like that?
Yeah. So Facebook was my first job out of college. So it was a huge wake up call into like what the real world felt like, I guess. Right after college, I just realized I'm oftentimes going to be not just the only woman, but the only Black woman. I'm also a mixed Black and Mexican, and I'm present as just Black. And so it's an interesting, you know, dynamic for me a lot of times being in these spaces where people don't fully see you as you are. And I feel like what helped me feel a little bit more welcomed and warm in these communities or in this workspace was finding my community, similar to Ish. Facebook has employee resource groups, and one of them for me was Black women at Facebook, where I just felt like I had a really strong, empowering, intelligent group of Black women that were always rooting for you. And it was just a great place to be, because I think you mentioned this earlier, Sergio, how important it is to see yourself in these spaces. And so to see other women who were also sometimes, you know, mixed ethnicities like me, just being able to tell me how they've worked through difficult conversations with colleagues, how they, you know, combated the imposter syndrome, helped me do it. I was able to copy that, right? And, you know, fully own the spaces that I was in. And then to kind of similar to what Stephen said, I think getting over the imposter syndrome for me meant having a stronger sense of self. And so that was, for me, I started meditating, I started exercising and reading, ultimately feeling a lot more confident in myself and my abilities at work. So it's my experience.
Definitely. So affirmations, finding like a sense of community at your workplace sounds like that's another common theme that's extremely important. Tito, is there anything you'd like to add to the question about barriers?
Well, I honestly, hearing all of their stories, I feel like literally we all like kind of went through the same path or the same experiences. Personally, you know, I also found my community within Twitter. We have a community, it's a business resource group called Twitter Alas, where it's for Latinx and Hispanics within Twitter. And I had the same experience as this, where I walked into Twitter and I was like, yo, like, where are my people? So it was nice getting to be part of that community. Luckily I had one close coworker who was a manager and was Latinx, who really kind of like grabbed me by the hand and was like, you know, we're going to make you successful. You know, you're going to make it here at Twitter. So definitely using your community, finding a sense of I belong within a company, especially if it's a huge company, you know, just knowing you belong, you made it this far. And that will honestly, at the end of the day, that will help you just figure out, I know I do belong here. I am going to be the person I want to be. But yeah, similar sentiment to everybody in this panel. It's just like, you know, I found my sense of community. I found people who had a similar background. They elevated me to the next level. They always motivated me. And then I think at the end of the day too, is one thing I do want to mention is, you know, once you're there, once you feel comfortable, once you're at a company, is paying it forward, giving the same thing that you got to other people, especially, you know, those who are URM or underrepresented minorities. People of color, definitely pushing that forward. And I've been trying my best to do that, you know, doing events like this. I have a couple mentees as well at Twitter. So it's you know, keeping it, pushing it forward and finding that sense of community.
I love that paying it forward and doing what, getting the help, or giving the help that you receive, you know, that's definitely very important. And then Ish, I know you worked as a diversity lead over at Snapchat. Is there any projects that you worked on yourself on trying to make it more inclusive, making tech more inclusive out there?
Yeah, there was. So what I was pretty much responsible for, I'm sure this is some of what Tito does as well, is diversity partnerships. So at many companies, the diversity team is very small. Sometimes it's only one person. Sometimes it's not even one person. It's like person's part of their job. But luckily we had a small team of about 4 people. And so I was responsible for trying to develop as much impact as possible with my 40 to 50 hours a week. So it's very difficult when you're doing it at a global company. And the one way that I was able to do it was through the use of events and partnerships and conferences. So I put together like an entire partnership strategy basically, and tapped into different organizations that had trusted relationships with Latino communities, Black communities, first-gen communities, veterans, LGBTQIA, disability. Like I think it was 7 or 8 different categories that we wanted to focus on. And one of them that was really different was socioeconomic status. Not very many companies take that into account. A lot of them do, you know, like Black, Latinx, et cetera. But, you know, sometimes you can be Black and or Latinx and be the 5th generation in your family to go to college. And it's completely different from being, you know, the first in your family to go to college, and your family's from Mexico, and you're the first one to speak English in your family, and you're first one to go to, like, all this stuff. And so we were one of the first companies to actually have a focus on not only like hiring, but like having an impact on the entire tech industry, on how they hire, you know, people from different backgrounds, in particular, low socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's kind of one. I don't want to get too deep into the details, but it's because it's really complex. Diversity and inclusion comes in so many different facets. But if people are interested in learning more, I would just like Google diversity, equity, and inclusion, and, you know, go down a rabbit hole on Wikipedia and just learn a little bit about it. It's really fascinating. And if you're from an underrepresented minority, I'm sure you feel a lot of what we feel on this call. So it's worth checking out.
Definitely, that's amazing. Steven, Tito, or Dana, are there any kind of like projects that you're working on at your giving tech company that involves creating like a sense of community like Ish, and involving diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I'm not shy, so I can definitely go first. One of the programs I actually initiated was right around culture. And culture means many different things, right? Culture can mean DEI, culture can also mean work culture. And so in this program, I touch on a little bit of each. So pretty much what I do is force everyone in our larger team meetings to spend 10 minutes on a cultural topic. So that could be Black History Month, Women's History Month, Stress Awareness Month, and the list goes on, right? So we really dive into some of those taboo topics like stress awareness, asking folks those nitty-gritty questions like, what drives you to check your emails while you're on vacation? Or why do you not feel empowered to fully log off on vacations, right? And taking that data and actually doing something with it. So yeah, that's kind of what I can't like Ish had mentioned, can't really get too much into the details, but that's one program that's coming on our end.
Definitely, thank you. And I think it's like good for us to know that there's projects and there's initiatives going on at each institution already to be more inclusive, more open. Tito?
Yeah, there's one thing that I've noticed, a lot of tech companies have this. I'm pretty sure Ish, even Steve and Dana have seen it. So we have programs that aren't always, high in that marketing, where we have things like what we call it's an early bird program, where it's just maybe like a 3-4 day program where you come to a company like Twitter, you learn from these engineering managers, you get to do a coding program. You go to it's kind of like a boot camp for a few days, and it's focused literally on like Latinx, Black women in tech, or people who are interested in getting in tech. And it's just amazing programs because when we look at who applied and when we market it, we get the students who are super diverse and super interesting to see, because once you go into these programs, it's a community of your background, right? You see everybody that you would probably see at Berkeley at Bakersfield or at UC Merced. And just doing a lot of research into these few day programs, they go a long way. I feel like a lot of these candidates who did participate in these programs end up, coming as interns to Twitter full time, or they end up coming full time at Twitter. So, I'm pretty sure, like I said, Ish, Dana, and Steven here, all of their respective companies have programs like this. So definitely leveraging some of those programs and looking into those, because sometimes, you won't land that internship, but there's that opportunity on the side that you can do for a few days and still add that to your resume. So those are a couple of things that we work on to make sure, we have diversity top of mind.
Yeah, just to add on to what Tito mentioned as well, because at LinkedIn, we did work on a lot of these programs. And so like, if you're in the audience and you're thinking like, how can I get into tech if I don't have experience? How do I get experience if I'm still in school? It's kind of like that chicken before the egg. Like, how do I get a job without experience? But I need a job to get experience. You guys should look up like different hackathons. And so like every tech company, they have these hackathons. I know it's been kind of weird because of COVID. I'm sure they've still had them. But at LinkedIn, we had technical and non-technical hackathons. Non-technical meaning like you don't have to know how to code. Ours were specifically for HR and business students. And the company used that, like Tito mentioned, as like a pipeline tool to get interns in the door, and then those interns to the door to become full-time employees, and then they grow with the company. So it's like a funnel before the funnel, essentially. I'm sure there's like a ton of Facebook groups. If you just Google like tech hackathons or tech non-technical hackathons, you'll be able to find a bunch of them and apply to them, because your odds of getting into like a technical hackathon or non-technical hackathon is much higher than like getting an interview, but it's a good way to get your foot in the door for sure.
Yeah, definitely that. Like, get your foot in the door, start getting some experience early on, and build your resume, because that's what's going to sell you when you're applying to, aside from networking. The next question is more towards Ish. You're working for a startup, Crave It. And so I'm sure the audience wants to know a little bit more about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and what goes into forming and executing new ideas.
Okay, that's a really good question. And luckily I got the question ahead of time, so I got to think through this, because this would have been really difficult to build out the framework for you all. So the first thing, I think you got to be very regimented. Like, working at a startup, there's a billion things going. Like, I worked at LinkedIn and Snap before, and I thought I was like busy beforehand, and I thought things were crazy. Now working at a startup, I'm doing basically 5 jobs at once every single day, and managing a team, and on investor calls, like pitching investors every single day, and reporting to a CEO. So I wouldn't say the stress level has increased. I would just say like the workload has increased, and being able to like be regimented with like, during this time, I'm going to do this, then this, and being very clear about what I will and won't do. that is like the foundation, because without that, everything else, the house just falls. But in terms of like what it takes to be like an entrepreneur, because outside of like being head of marketing at Crave It, I'm also an author, a podcaster. I do stuff like this all the time. I consult with other startups and help them with their marketing. And I also just got an advisory board for Hack the Hood, which is a really awesome organization. You all should check it out as well. They help Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities just prove their professionalism and like get into tech and other jobs as well. Tito, you should check them out too for Twitter. But in terms of the framework that I kind of thought through, like what is it, how do you do it basically is the question that I always get every single time. There's three main things. So the first is you have to be extremely disciplined. If you want to like work at a startup or work in tech or be an entrepreneur, without the discipline, and it's going to sound cheesy, like everybody talks about it, but without the discipline, you won't get half of the things done. Yeah, not even a quarter of it, because things pop up, you know, like you want to do this, there's 10 other projects you could be working on. So you give all of them 5% of your time and you get nothing done for any of them. So being disciplined is the first. The second is you got to have extremely tough skin. I know that's another cheesy one that everybody talks about, and Dana kind of touched on it a little bit during her application process. But being like an entrepreneur, you're the head of your company, or even working at a startup and being a leader, you're the head of a company. Like I've been on probably, if I had to guess, close to 100 investor pitch calls in the past 4 months. So like we're pitching venture capitalists, investors to invest in our startup. And, you know, we've gotten rejected probably 98% of the time. So almost 100 times, you know. But one of those will hit, and a few of them have hit. But being able to have like that tough skin and be able to say like, you know what, just keep going. We could keep chipping away at it will help. And same thing with the book, same thing with the podcast, same thing with everything that I've done, all these other things like DJing as well. Having tough skin has been able to help me through all of it. And then the third thing, and this kind of plays into what I mentioned, but just being like extremely and overly extremely protective of your time and energy. Especially now that we've all been at home and social media is in our face. We all work at social media companies in some sort or another. We all know how extremely addicting they can be because they're made to be like that. You know, they're made for you to be using them more. And so developing like frameworks and using tools of like, during this time is when I will check Twitter. During this time is when I will do work. During this time is when I will sleep. And saying like, this is what I have time for. Here's what I have time for. Here's what I have no energy for whatsoever. Whether that be like news or whether that be like certain people in your life, because that eats like, even if it's 30 minutes of your time, it could eat up 10 hours worth of energy. And I think people don't talk about that. They always talk about like the time management, but like it's these little bites and pieces of energy that suck all the life out of you. So those are the three things basically. And I think everything else you can figure it out as long as you have those three.
Definitely very good tips. And then you did come out with a book. Would you give us the name of the book and where we can find it?
Yep. So it's called How Successful People Get Ish Done. It's basically a 7-step framework. If you guys like the 3 things I just mentioned right now, I break down like what you need to do to achieve any goal, whether it's like personal fitness, you want to land a job in tech, you want to launch a company, etc. I won't break down the entire framework, but I'll just mention the first step because I think it's the most important step. And I always mentioned it to anybody that I talk to. So we always talk about this thing, self-awareness, right? Dana is so successful because she's so self-aware. Tito is so self-aware. That's why he's so great at what he does, etc. But when I started researching people, these really successful people like Oprah Winfrey, Kobe Bryant, etc., I started trying to analyze like how the hell do I teach somebody else, like my younger sister or a cousin or a mentee, how to become more self-aware. It's very difficult. And I went down this rabbit hole of like so many days of just researching, and I came across a psychological term called self-concept. We all have different self-concepts. There's our current self, there's our past self, there's past selves of us, like past versions, and then there's our future self, our potential self. And being able to break down each section of who you are very, very minutely, down to like the even tiniest details, like what is your favorite music? What is your favorite food? What do you like to do? What do you hate to do? What sucks energy? What gives you energy? Like what time of day are you most creative? All of these different details in different elements or different time frames, basically. Your future self, what do you think you could be doing? And once you break all of that down, then the world becomes so much more clear, because you're not like trying to do a million different things, or you're not being guided in a certain direction because somebody on Instagram said this is dope and you should do this, or somebody on Twitter was like, yo, this is flashy, you got to be doing this. Now you're very clear about like, for the past 28 years, I've liked doing this. The odds are I'm gonna like doing this in the future. So I shouldn't do that just because my friend is doing it. You know what I mean? So that's basically the first step. And then from that, the whole framework helps out.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Ish, for that. And as we are wrapping up, I'd ask Dana first, what can students do now that they're most prepared for a career in tech? So what can they do now so that they're prepared for tech?
I would just say start building a really strong network. I think it can be difficult to do that if you don't have that in your immediate environment. Like for me, I grew up in Ontario, California, not really a tech hub. But when I came to UC Merced, I joined a co-ed business fraternity, and I kind of learned like, okay, who has connections? And these people were genuinely my friends, but I just knew, okay, how can I leverage these relationships in the future to help me get to where their family's at? And then I could help my family and my people. So definitely relationship building. And I also think something that people don't realize is like, when you're in college, you can go years after graduating without seeing people. And so when you ask for a referral, those later on, they're going to remember the what you showed them when you were a college student because they haven't seen you in years, in my opinion. So make sure that you're someone that people would be comfortable referring later on. So like be the person to host the study sessions, or be the one to like help someone out with, you know, studying if they're struggling with something and you have it as your strength, and you know, vice versa.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Stephen, would you like to add anything on for what students can do now to prepare for a career in tech?
Absolutely, I would love to. And you know, any chance I can relate this back to tech, I take my chances. So I would say right now we're living in the age of ecosystems. And as we all know, the most well-used ecosystem is Apple, right? Your phone speaks to your watch, speaks to your laptop. Now, Google also has a stellar home ecosystem where your Google Doorbell speaks to your Google Home Hub, which speaks to your Google Chromecast and back to your doorbell, right? So now where am I going with this? Well, when you relate your personal brand to an ecosystem, you know, you want your resume to seamlessly connect to your portfolio, which connects to your LinkedIn, which connects to your Instagram. So you're creating this interconnected web of all things that are you. And as Dana said, you also want to think about that as your network, right? It's how you speak with your networks of teachers, and how they speak to one another, how your teachers relay the message to your friends, relay the message to potential employers, right? Definitely want to think of that. But I think more importantly, it's also being conscientious of the story that you're telling. So you want to ask yourself, do the colors, the tone, the diction, and the graphs actually tell the story you want to tell? And the reason why this is so critical is so that recruiters not only spend more time on your profile, right, because they can easily go from one point to the other, but that your personal brand is apparent at first glance. So definitely think about how your ecosystem connects together.
Definitely. Thank you. And then Tito, would you like to add anything else as the recruiter?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one huge thing is first things first, +1 to everything Stephen and Dana said. Those are crucial steps and you know, getting into tech. But I think one other thing is to definitely get out of your comfort zone. I feel like a big company like Twitter, like LinkedIn, like Facebook, all of these companies will put you in situations where you eventually are going to be out of your comfort zone, where you're going to talk in front of hundreds of people, where you're going to have to do things that you've never done before. So, you know, doing it early in your career is super important. And when it comes to your resume, is definitely adding those keywords. You know, you see a job description, you like it, add those keywords. The process, and most companies follow this process where like you'll initially, you know, go through a screening by the recruiter that will look up those keywords, right? So we'll want to look at, just as an example, Python, Java, things like that we're going to look for. You know, once we find your resume, we're going to want to have that conversation with you. We're going to want to make sure, you know, you've used those skills. And that'll get you to to that first step, having all those things that you see on the job description on your resume. You know, once you get to that hiring manager level, that's when you'll have to be more detailed. but making sure, you know, if you want to get past that first stage, definitely have those keywords, have those key skills that they're looking for. Every job application you're going to apply to is going to be different. And this is definitely going to be a hustle to change your resume for every single application you apply to. But that does make a difference. You know, it gets you through that first step, which is that resume, either recruiter screen or the recruiter pushing that resume to the hiring manager, whatever the case is, whatever the process the company holds. That is the first step. And then after that, obviously, you know, you speaking on your experiences, actually being involved, you know, putting your projects on there, even if you've, you know, done a crazy project where your code didn't run, but you did, you know, you were the leader of that group, speak on that and what you did to do things better. So if that's one advice I can give is definitely that. And I've seen it, you know, everywhere I've recruited. So yeah.
Amazing pointers. Thank you, everybody. Before we pass off the questions to the audience, are there any final thoughts? Maybe something that we didn't cover that you would have liked for us to have covered today? No? All right, perfect. Dr. Burrows, I think we're ready for the audience questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Sergio, for your wonderful work moderating this fantastic conversation. And to our panelists, it's been just a pleasure to hear your personal experiences, your advice. It's just really been wonderful. So thank you for your time. And we do have a number of audience questions here. So some really great ones too. So I want to start transitioning to these. One question, this is addressed to Tito, and I think some of our other panelists have talked about this as well, but I'll start with Tito here. Given you're a diversity recruiter, how do you change company culture to bring more diverse employees and students in? I know you talked a bit about that. Ish talked a bit about that. I think we all kind of touched on it a little bit, but Tito, can you start us off? I mean, how do you think about that? Are there ways we can change company culture to foster more diversity with employees for students coming into the professional field now?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit on my process and what I've been doing. So I think first things first is, you know, as a diversity recruiter, I go to different HSIs, HBCUs, conferences like NESB, SHIP, GHC, where they're focused on underrepresented communities. Is the community seeing somebody that's, you know, of color there. So seeing a Latinx, somebody from the Black community there. I think it's the first steps to having those realistic conversations with these students or with these professionals who are looking to get into a tech company. But one thing we've been doing is like I said, when we mentioned this, we have our BRGs, our business resource groups within Twitter, is having them participate a little bit more in any event or any conference that Twitter has put together. So for example, the year we got things like NextTech, SB, where we always bring our Black community resource group, which is Twitter Blackbirds, which is one of our biggest communities within Twitter, to these different events, right? And we do something completely different. So for like Afrotech 1 year, instead of having like a regular, you know, chat with a recruiter one-on-one, grab your resume and next, right? We hosted like a party kind of thing where recruiters were mingling with students, recruiters were, you know, eating with students. There was food, there was music, they were playing music that somebody from an underrepresented community would listen to, right? Let's say, you know, some Drake, some Snoop Dogg, things like that you would want to listen to. And I think those type of events and those type of things are ways to really get those conversations sparking and build that community within Twitter. We do that for our internal events. I won't go too much into detail on what they do, but yeah, those are some of the things that I see Twitter going. But as a whole, as a company, Twitter's vision is definitely into that diversity and inclusion workspace. So you can probably even just search it in Twitter and you'll find, you know, different things that Twitter is doing. Google it and you'll find different things that Twitter's doing.
Thanks, Tito. And you know, I know Ish, you talked about in one of your responses on that topic about kind of the importance of having like a comfortable space, a space to be yourself and not just having to put up a facade. And you know, are there ways, I mean, you found that space, you were able to carve out that, you said even sometimes 15 minutes a day, sometimes even, and that was important for you. Are there ways that you think companies could do that more effectively? I mean, so it's not just dependent on diverse employees doing that, but are there ways that companies could structure in a kind of space like that more effectively?
Yeah, I mean, they can provide the funding and the space for employees to actually be able to set these things up, because sometimes they're so under-resourced that they're forced to do them on their own, like organically. So yeah, it takes little to no time to put, a 30-minute calendar invite and send it out to 100 employees who are all from an underrepresented community and saying like, hey, we're going to do lunch on us, come just hang out, build community on your own. I think a lot of times companies try to force it and it doesn't work, but if they hold spaces like what Tito's talking about, then that works great. Just let the employees do it themselves. But back to the broader question, I think companies just need to hire diverse talent at this very senior level. It's as simple as that. If they're not hiring underrepresented minorities at the director, vice president, and even the CEO level, then what happens is they come in at the junior level and then they get taken by another tech company and then by another tech company. So that's why the percentages never increase. Whereas if you have a senior leader at the company, you can literally see yourself grow with that company for 5 years, but without that leadership, it's very difficult. And that's the issue that tech is having right now,
Well said.
Basically a glass ceiling at like the senior manager level or junior manager level, I think it is.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ish. And I know, Dana, that's something you talked about as well. I mean, the importance of seeing yourself, including in leadership positions, and how important that was for you. Can you say a bit more about that, and how you've experienced that in your career at Facebook?
Yeah, I think like everyone's mentioned, there's a limited amount of minorities at a lot of these tech companies. I think my perspective has changed in my just kind of comfort at the company has changed. I actually now have a Black manager, and it's very interesting to just see the subtle differences in how I just feel a lot more welcome in the space. And I definitely can see myself, taking on a leadership a lot more easier now that I've seen, and I've report to someone who looks like me. So I think it is what Ish mentioned is very important. I think their leadership, it trickles down, right? So it's just like the messages that they send, the things that they do, sometimes are just different. And it's nice to have that type of comfort, and you just feel like you're seen a lot more.
Thank you, Dana. This next question is from an anonymous attendee. I'm going to start this with you, Stephen, if you don't mind. Did you have any major culture shock coming from a small school and/or from the Central Valley to your current position? And if so, what was that like for you?
Yeah, one of the beautiful things about Google is that it is extremely diverse. And being born and raised in the Central Valley, I wasn't exposed to any different cultures other than the Mexican culture or Latin culture, right? And so I've been accustomed to how I interact with my friends back home who also identify as Mexican, right? So there was somewhat of a learning curve coming into the tech industry, learning how different people from different cultures interact differently. All to say though, I think the programs we've been implementing with our cultural moments really help with that. The point of that is really understanding what the experiences these people have been through and almost how that shapes them, right? And so we do it together as a learning moment. But yeah, I think that was the learning curve, which is being exposed to more different types of people. But it's also a beautiful thing. I've learned so much more about myself in doing that exercise, right? Learning about my preferences and learning about how I operate and how I can best tailor that to other folks. So
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Thank you. So this next question comes from Marissa, and this is an open question, so I'm going to let anybody field it who would like to. So Marissa writes, first of all, congratulations on the success of all the panelists. I'm an individual who works in tech and has returned to CSUB now to finish my bachelor's degree online. My question is, are there additional certifications you have earned in your career? I assume that means post-university. Are you involved in any industry organizations and committees? And if so, how important has that been to your career? Does anybody want to speak to that question?
I can talk about it a little bit. So I'm currently in a marketing role. I didn't study marketing. I actually only took one marketing class in college because that's the only class that we had for marketing. It was my favorite class, by the way. I took it twice. But after graduating and working at LinkedIn for a little while, I realized that I was in recruiting events and then transitioned to like a program manager role. But I realized that marketing was what I wanted to do. And so I didn't have a degree in marketing. Everybody that works in tech usually has like a ton of experience or expertise. So I just basically became self-educated. I took, I think, 22 different classes online, LinkedIn Learning, YouTube, like Udemy, all these different things. And then just found like my own like mentors, marketing mentors. So in tech, I just Googled like who are the best marketing CMOs, chief marketing officers, started following them online on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and started learning from them. And funny enough, I know it sounds like that's really non-traditional, which it isn't. Like I didn't go back to UC Berkeley, do an extension program like a lot of people do. But that helped me a ton. And I applied everything that I learned through all those online courses into like my side hustles. Then I took that and then basically proved that it worked and then applied it in my day job, doing side projects. And then those side projects doing marketing, like my 20% of my job basically became 40%, became 50%, became like 60, 70%. Next thing you know, I was like a social media marketing lead at LinkedIn. But yeah, basically self-educated. I think I know that those extension programs do work though. Like I have a lot of friends that did the Berkeley one, and they learn a ton. So as long as you're able to apply those learnings on real projects and show what you did, then I think they help a ton.
Thank you, Ish. So here's a good question. I know all of you have been through interviews and you've talked a bit about the process of getting your jobs. I know Dana talked about her persistence, sending out 100 applications, which is impressive, right? I think a good lesson in persistence. This anonymous attendee asks, can the panelists share any tips they have for doing well in interviews? And Tito, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I think I used to always be super nervous when it came to interviews, always in college. But one thing that I learned is keep it as a conversation, or try to think of it as a conversation rather than an interview, rather than you being tested. The interview, I always believe it goes both ways, right? So just like the company is trying to figure out if you're a good fit or if you'd be the best person for the role, you're trying to figure out if this role is a good fit for you and if the company's a good fit for whatever you stand for, right? So I think one way I've always approached it, and it's always worked for me, is treating it as a conversation. Going in there knowing that I want to talk. I also I want to tell them about me, but I also want to get to learn what they're doing. What can I do to get better as their growth opportunities? So that's one tip that I can give. And if you treat it like a conversation, it'll be a conversation rather than just like straight up they ask you one question and you're kind of like a robotic kind of tone where it's just like, hey, blah blah blah, and then next question, and then when you do treat it like conversation, it's just like it flows, it goes back and forth. They ask questions, you ask questions. It's not just the interviewer throwing questions at you the whole time. So yeah, definitely treat it like a conversation.
Can I actually add something to that really quickly?
Please.
Something I feel like is important when you want to do well in an interview is to have actual tangible examples, because people speak hypothetically and it doesn't show the interviewer that you've actually had to experience that before. If you're able to tell them a scenario where you dealt with a difficult coworker and you were able to come to a solution, I think you come off as a much stronger candidate. I'd also suggest that even if you don't have like your previous work experience doesn't directly align to what you're interviewing for, pull specific things from that previous experience that may relate to the job that you're doing now, right? So what I mean by that is, like, if I had an event coordinating position job in college, I am not necessarily talking about like the hospitality aspect of it when I'm going into interview for a recruiting coord position. I'm going to focus on the logistical piece that I had to work on, and then talk about that in the interview. And I think it shows that you have transferable skills.
I'm going to add one really quick thing just to make it crystal clear, because I think this is crucial for every single interview. Tito mentioned it, but I'm just going to clarify it 100%. Come to every single interview with at least one thoughtful question. At the end of every interview, 99% of the time, they will say, all right, do you have any questions for me? And do not say no. Like, do your research ahead of time. Literally research the company, research the mission, research what they stand for. If you can, research how they make money. Like, understand as much as you can about the business and the person who you're interviewing, who's interviewing you. And if you can come with 2 to 3 really thoughtful questions, that is going to leave like one of the best. They're probably going to take your resume and just put it to like the top of the list, even if the entire interview wasn't great, because you took the time to do your research. And most people don't ask questions, so like you're already standing out. So just do that for sure.
And on that note, I feel like I have to jump in as well. And I'm also really passionate about this topic anyway. So kind of piggybacking off Dana, it's really almost developing a framework for how you answer questions. And I know at Google, a lot of our questions are very open-ended intentionally. It's to question how you problem solve at a high level. So this isn't an example, but I'm going to use it as an example. So let's just say someone were to ask me, let's say you're going to open a Google office in India. How do you go about that? Literally just like that. So you want to develop a framework, right? It's doing all of your research beforehand. It's building your team. It's then building the execution, the marketing, and actually designing an experience, making it an experience, and then finishing it off with a story, right? And that's how I would answer it. But kind of thinking of how you can develop a framework, and it doesn't have to be the same framework for each question. It just has to be a framework to guide you through how you're going to answer the question.
Or just show them that you have a framework as you're explaining it. You don't have to, yeah, that helps a lot too.
Wow, this is really fantastic responses. I'm taking notes here myself. This is really just fantastic advice. So thank you so much. I'm going to stick on the interview theme. Those are fascinating responses. And there's another interview related question. Anonymous attendee asked, when an applicant is asked what his or her weakness is at a job interview, what do they want to hear from the applicant? If you can answer that. But they say, how can I turn this kind of question into an opportunity that is something positive and helpful and leaving them with a good impression of me? Any advice on this? Anybody have thoughts about that?
I feel like Tito probably hears that all the time. He's like, like every single day. I think sometimes it's kind of cliche to say like, you know, my biggest weakness is also my biggest strength, which we all want to say that. A lot of these tech companies, they want you to be very honest and real. And most of the times, if they've interviewed you and researched you a lot, they probably already know your weaknesses. They've identified them. They just want to see if you're like open and willing to say them, you know? So like a lot of times what I will say is like, I mean, I'm not going to give you my specific example, but I'll just say like, my weakness is so-and-so, but this is something that I'm actively working on. I acknowledge it. And I understand that I need to grow in this area of my life in order to be better as a marketing leader. You know, and that way they see like, oh, you've thought about it, you've acknowledged it, and you're taking classes or, you know, you're doing projects already to get better. Simple as that.
Yeah, definitely a great explanation from Ish. We see that all the time. But yeah, just what Ish said, like we want to hear that you're being authentic and you're telling us, you know, what area, you know, you're looking to improve. And I think, you know, I'll give one example. You know, you can say things like, you know, I'm struggling in the time management area, but and be very truthful about it and just talk about ways you're working to improve it. You know, I got a Google Calendar, I got a planner, I got something going on, and this is what I'm doing to take this to the next level to make sure, you know, I'm better at this. Yeah, and just be very, you know, be open, be yourself, tell the truth. I think that'll go a long way. A lot of people try to be, you know, hey, I did this, but now I'm doing this because I'm so much better at it now. So just, yeah, be truthful. Talk about ways that you're going to that next level and actually taking steps to be better at whatever that weakness is.
Thank you so much. So this next question comes back to the theme of imposter syndrome. Another anonymous attendee asks, you know, it says, I find it wonderful that all of you have had such amazing accomplishments. Many of you have overcome multiple barriers as well. How can we help overcome imposter syndrome within ourselves? And how can we also keep motivating younger generations to go after jobs that do not already have a lot of representation? And, you know, Stephen, I know you initially raised the imposter syndrome topic. So I'll start with you on either one of those questions. Either how can we help overcome imposter syndrome within ourselves, and or how can we also keep motivating younger generations to go after jobs that do not have a lot of representation?
I would love to start by sharing a quote my manager shared with me. She said, if you have a seat at the table, don't waste it. And I'll tell you, I sat back in my chair and mind blown, right? Because that's so true. I mean, as everyone had said here on the chat, you know, besides us trying to infiltrate tech, we're also pioneering so that way other people can follow our steps, making it that much easier for other people of color to follow our steps, right? So that's what I remind myself daily. Although I still have these feelings of imposter syndrome, it's reminding myself that there's other people coming right behind me. So it's paving an easier way for them to follow those footsteps and also being that helping hand, you know?
Do others have thoughts on either one of those questions? Okay, so I'm going to move on to question here about moments where your voice has not been heard. Have you been in a work context in which you felt like your voice was not heard? And how do you address this and when something like that happens, if you do? Anybody have thoughts on that?
I can share a little bit. There was a situation where my team was working extremely hard, like double, triple the number of hours that a normal person should be putting in a week. And I raised concerns like, hey, this is not good for our mental health. This is, you know, we're going to be burnt out before season actually hits. And I felt that it was heard. My voice was heard, but it wasn't understood, and there was no action that followed. So it was like, yes, we hear you, but this needs to get done, and we're going to have to get it done no matter what. And I think in any job that's going to happen, right? You're going to be heads down for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. You put in a 50-hour work week, a 60-hour work week, maybe an 80-hour work week. We were doing like 90-hour work weeks. I won't say where I was working because I don't want to put them on blast too much, but it basically got to a point where it was like basically like a month and a half of this, and I was just like exhausted to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm putting my foot down because this is overstepping my personal values and my personal barriers, and I've basically bent backwards way too long. So I quit. And I don't think people need to like go ahead and go to that extreme every single time, but I think understanding like where your values stand would help you when you want to speak up or when you feel like you're being heard but there's no action being taken. So that's mine.
Thank you, Ish. So a question comes up, Dana, I think this is relevant to something you raised in terms of the application process for you. An attendee asked, when applying and getting rejected from positions or not hearing back at all, what can you do to keep going when feeling down? And I wanted to start with you because I know you talked about, you know, not hearing back and getting some rejection. So, you know, do you have any thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I would say if they do let you know, respond and just see like, hey, if there's anything that I could do to improve, please let me know. They may not be specific. A lot of times they're not, but if, you know, asking, there's nothing wrong with asking. And then I would just say, for me, I don't know if it's anything specific that I was doing intentionally as so much as like inherent in me. It's like, I felt like I was like, there was no other option but to keep going. I was like, I cannot be supported by my parents, to be honest. And then like this way that I'm living right now is not sustainable. So I feel like for me, I was like, I just kept having to push myself. And so I think I would wake up at like 8 a.m. and then just do the grind of keeping on researching on whichever companies were hiring. I would take time to just like, you know, maintain my self-care, do a quick little run or do something like that for myself. But I think I was just so desperate at the time that I was like, that was all I was really focused on. I don't know if that answered your question or if anyone else wants to add to it.
So what Dana just explained right now is the definition of grit. Like there's this whole dilemma of, can grit be taught? Who knows? But I think one thing people can do is like read the book by Angela Duckworth, who coined the term grit. And you'll be able to better understand like how are gritty people like Dana able to do what they do. And it basically puts you in their brain because it shows so many different examples of how they do it. And then basically it's up to you, the reader or the person, to try to apply as much as possible from the book and put yourself in those experiences over and over and over and over and over and be like basically the underdog in many situations till you like get slapped in the face so many times. You're like, all right, I just got to keep on going, you know, because that's how Dana developed her grit, basically her strength, you know.
Yeah, and I think also asking like friends who went through the process, right? So specifically asking Ish, or asking my friend Eugene, who ended up referring me to Facebook, and just asking them like, okay, what can I be doing better? I've been getting, you know, all these rejections. What did you do to like, you know, fine tune your resume? And just asking for feedback constantly, I think is important.
It's fantastic, but very, very helpful responses. Thank you. And just two more questions here. One is, you know, so obviously all of you are working in tech, and what is your favorite aspect of the career path that you've chosen? You know, what if you were to identify, you know, kind of, I know there's probably several things, but one thing that really stands out to you is your favorite aspect of the work that you do. What would you say it is? And maybe we could start with Tito.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it's not more about tech at this point. It's really more about my role and what I do. As I mentioned before, I'm very passionate about helping students, helping people who have maybe a same background as me get into that tech world. And you know, really being that person that push them to the next level. But I think, you know, being very honest in the tech world, you know, compensation is definitely one big thing. Finances are one big thing. And I'm very prideful to be the person that says, I'm going to help my parents retire. I'm going to help my parents take it to the next level. I'm going to buy them their house. I'm going to buy my dad a truck, whatever the case is. I think that's definitely a big motivator. In what I've seen in the path that I've taken, you know, tech is definitely one of the places where compensation is definitely elevated. And you know, this helps you in the future, you know, this helps you with whatever you have planned. And I think that was one big thing. But outside of it, I mean, I really, you know, when I wasn't in college, Google was kind of like my dream company. So, you know, just always having that in the back of my head, knowing that I wanted to join tech as a student, eventually turned into that. But those are some of the aspects that really make me love tech.
Thank you, Tito. Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, definitely +1 to that. You can't complain about compensation in tech. But you know, moving on through, I also really wanted to work for Google, ever since I was in high school. That was like my dream company. I knew I wanted it, and that's what I was going to go after. And I'm that stubborn Latino, you know, that whenever I have my mind made up, that's it. There's no way going back. So fortunately, I made it here. But the reason why I was so drawn to it is for many things. It's the lifestyle that it gives you, right? Although I work hard and I'm very industrious, I still have the flexibility to build my own schedule. So if I need to run to the DMV at noon, I can do that and make up for it in the afternoon. I think it was also the autonomy that my manager, gives me every day in my work. She says, I really don't care where you work as long as you're doing your work. As long as you're doing stellar work, I don't care where you work. And so, you know, I can travel to different cities, work from there. I've done that a couple times. Quarantined, of course, safe and with precaution. But, you know, I have that opportunity. And it's also the culture. It's definitely the culture. At Google, we celebrate different cultures, as you heard, with the different programs we work on, and we do that at the company level. So it's a beautiful thing, almost, I like to call it like utopia, right? That's my ideal world, and I want to live in it, and it's been great. So sorry, I didn't pick one. I listed multiple, but I couldn't help but choose.
That's okay. Thank you. Dana?
I think for my role, I think it's really interesting because I get to directly help with what's on the roadmap of the company by working on the mergers and acquisitions team. So it's really exciting. And working with like different executives in different departments, I find that really invigorating work. And I think what makes me really happy to work at Facebook is still hands down the people. I think we work with extremely brilliant and emotionally intelligent people who are not perfect, but they are trying their hardest. They are trying their best to continue bettering themselves. Specifically, again, just the ERG groups, I've met some of the best people ever at the company I work with or work at. And I'm so excited to work with them every single day. It just makes work just that much better.
Thank you, Dana. And Ish?
So the question is, why does working in tech interest you most, right?
Yeah, like what is your favorite aspect about working in tech and the career you've formed?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think if you would have asked me 5 years ago, it would have probably been like the food and like and the fact that like we get just working with amazing people. I think now that I'm a little bit more established in my career, I've come to the realization that there's three things that I love more than anything else, aside from like my family and my personal relationships. And those three things are impact, scale, and growth. Could be personal, professional growth. And tech is probably the only industry where I'm able to have those three things to this like extreme degree, you know, like you can be in Singapore and download Snapchat. All you need is a phone. You can be like around the world and have LinkedIn, Crave it. All of these things, there's such a low barrier of entry, meaning like it takes little to nothing to be able to utilize these platforms, these tools. And that's what attracts me to it. It's able to scale so quickly too. You build an app, you write a book, you do a podcast, anything that scales very quickly and has the potential to impact people like around the world is probably why I'm still working in tech. And if I wasn't working in tech, I'd be building my own tech company for sure.
Thank you all for those responses. And just a final question. You know, we've obviously been and still in the midst of a global pandemic. Although we've seen some promising developments with the vaccine and increasing people getting and receiving the vaccine around the world. But how has the pandemic impacted your job and your work? I know several of you mentioned in your responses, like the flexibility, being able to work around the world, and many people, including myself, right? We're not used to kind of working at home as much, and now that's what we've been doing exclusively. So, how has the pandemic impacted you and your work, if you felt it, you know, severely in your professional career? Anybody like to respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you, Dr. Burrows, I'm sure all of us are dying to get back into the office. I think we've been at home way too long. But, you know, with unprecedented times comes unprecedented opportunities. And, you know, for me, what I love, again, that I have the autonomy to create programs and to implement them. It was creating programs to shift and keep the Google culture. I mean, that's really my sole responsibility, Google culture for my team, really keep that alive in a virtual environment. Now, it's come with many challenges, as one can assume, but it's been a challenge that has paid off and has really taught me a lot about myself. So I've created all these summer programs to continue to entertain folks. I've shipped many different kits weekly. And the list goes on, right? So again, it's just having the opportunity to create my own opportunities.
Yeah, very similar to Stephen here. You know, with our internship program, we had to really think quick and then move over to a fully virtual internship this past summer. And, you know, attending conferences such as NSB and SHIP and JC in a virtual world, which is much different, right? And really thinking about the processes that we want to implement while we're going through these events. That's definitely a change, but I think just like Stephen said, it's another opportunity for us to think of things outside of what we regularly do. So I saw it as an opportunity, you know, I saw it as a way for us to get creative. And honestly, you know, I think the biggest impact has to be not getting Twitter's food. Definitely. I think I've had to cook for myself the most I have in maybe like 2-3 years. So that was definitely a huge impact.
I think we all agree there too on that one.
I was just going to say really quickly, I started a new position during the pandemic, which has actually been very challenging for me. So I started this new role in April of 2020. And I think onboarding virtually is something that I'm unfamiliar with. And it was difficult not having those opportunities to just look over your, trainer's shoulder and be like, okay, wait, what are you doing there? So there were a lot of knowledge gaps, I feel like, for months for me. And so I just had to be extra resourceful and use the documents available to kind of figure things out on my own. I will also say another con to this, because there are a lot of perks to working remotely, but I would say another con is just that I'm someone who thrives with like in-person interaction with people. It's how I build relationships with people, especially colleagues, so that our relationship isn't just solely projects. Okay, we're working on this, it's, oh, what did you do on the weekend? We share this common interest. And not having that piece in my workflow has been challenging, to be honest. And so now, as I'm on this new team, it's just like I hop onto these calls, we talk about work, we hop off, and it's just like I'm still missing that personal element. And so I'm excited, to be honest, to go back to the office just to gain that again.
And I'll kind of close it out because that was a perfect segue, Dana. So I'll keep it 100 with you guys too. Like, it was really difficult for me to transition. I was working at Snap when the pandemic hit. I was also about to publish my book. And so there was all these different changes and constraints that were happening. And it was really tough, honestly, for me. Like I have ADHD. I'm an ambivert, meaning that like, depending on my environment, I would adapt to it. My personality adapts, which is why working in an office, being with fun people works, because you get the energy out. But at the time when the pandemic hit, I was living in a 15 by 15 studio by myself on a computer for, I don't know, 18 hours a day, like every waking moment, basically. And it was really, really difficult for me. I also started a new job at a new company, onboarded remotely, got one direct report, made one hire, all remotely. My team and we've never met in person, much like probably Dana's team as well. And it's just so weird. But I guess to end on a positive note, there's one quote that one of my quotes that I live by, and it's constraints breed creativity. So like all the constraints that we have all been hit with, there's been some creative effort or solution that has come out that wouldn't have happened otherwise if this pandemic hadn't happened. And so I think there's a little positive to everything. Obviously, there's a lot of negative. We've been through a lot. But we've grown as professionals, and we've grown, I think, as an industry as well.
Well put. And I like to end on that positive note too. And we're at time for the event. I want to be respectful of our panelists' time here. But it's been a fascinating conversation. And Sergio, excellent job moderating. Thanks for bringing this conversation together and for your leadership. And Stephen, Ish, Dana, Tito, again, just really appreciate your earnest answers, your concrete advice, and just sharing your life experiences. And I think it's really helpful for me and our community as well. So thank you for being with us.
And thank you for creating the space. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. Happy to do so.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, be safe, and everybody be safe and be well out there. We'll see you next time.
Cool.
Have a good
Bye,
day.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.